Productive Disruption is a podcast presented by Rhodes Branding, spotlighting bold and innovative ideas that have the ability to reshape K-12 education. If you're looking for actionable ideas about how to operate and innovate your school, you've come to the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome to Productive Disruption. My name is Dan Wyar, and I am the Vice President of Operations here at Rhodes Branding. We are super excited for today's guest. Today we have on Mike Smith, and Mike is the co-executive director and co-founder of The Bay. And I believe he is our first guest from Nebraska on the podcast, so we're super excited to have that as well. So, Mike, thanks for joining us, man.
Of course, and anytime I get to be the first one from Nebraska or represent Nebraska well, I feel a sense of pride in that. And so stoked to be your first Nebraska guest on for sure. Thanks for having me, dude.
Absolutely. Well, I guess just to start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how someone with your background, I guess, got started and how you ended up launching the Bay?
Yeah, and so I come from like a pure youth development, youth work background. Like that has been my entire career, is working on the kids side of things. And so it's always been, wherever a programmer would work with youth, that's kind of where I found myself. And so that took me into so many different spaces, from like, after school basketball programs to like a summer camp in Yosemite National Park, teaching kids like wakeboarding and skateboarding, and you're in like the mountains. And then there's, I ended up as a social worker, honestly, was what happened. And so I was working with homeless, runaway youth. At-risk youth was kind of the lane that I connected with the most. And so you start to, as you get older, your direction starts to get a little bit more clear. And I found unconventional youth, kids taking a different path than the traditional path forward, were the ones that I thought I could be the best advocate for. And so I ended up being the judge of teen court. And so I'm sitting there for like 2 years listening to every kid in our town who gets in trouble, and their parents are with them and they want this like thing off their record. So they have to do community service and make it right with the community. And so I'm like the fake judge of this fake court, but it's really all about just community service. And it really hit me that kids in Lincoln, that's where I'm from, Lincoln, Nebraska, kids in Lincoln, when you think about, if you think about them on like the criminal level, as I was like interacting with them, like after they've broken the law, I realized two very quick things. One, Nebraska kids are not good at breaking the law. Like they were terrible at it. Like they couldn't get away with it. There was always like some kid who was too nice and would tell on the whole group. Like they would always post it on social media. Like they'd tell their parent. It was just, kids didn't get away with much in a little town like this. And so all these kids are in trouble. So you're talking to them week after week and you're getting to the root of the problem. And I realized, one, they're just bad criminals. And two, they're not bad. They're just bored. And that was what I realized the actual root issue was. If you asked a kid, is there nothing to do here? They'd all be like, yes, there's nothing to do. And I was like, oh, I can create something to do. I grew up in a small farm town, and I felt like my like job in our friend group was to be the guy that created the something to do in the middle of nothing to do. And so I'm from the capital of nothing to do. I was like, I can do this. So I was like, I'm gonna create my own place where kids can go and do the thing that they love to do, which was, my focus was skateboarding and music and art and mentoring and mentorship. And it's like, I just kind of focused on that, and I opened up a skate park in a mall as a nonprofit, and spent the last 12 years sort of navigating it. But it really just grew out of this like youth workspace and this like passion to keep solving the next big problem in front of me that I got really excited about. And that led me to starting my own nonprofit when I was 26, 27. And that's kind of how I ended up here.
That's awesome, man. I can definitely relate to that. Growing up in a somewhat smaller town in Ohio, and instead of skateboards, me and my friends were more, the BMX dirt bikes, like building these
Sure.
crazy jumps behind like these
Yeah,
housing developments that were still in progress, and putting fire pits in between the two sides of the ramp. So I can definitely relate to
totally.
having nothing to do in a small town. You kind of, if you're left to your own devices as a kid, you can do some crazy stuff. So,
Absolutely. And
cool.
pre-internet, yeah, it was so
Yeah.
crazy as kids. It was fun.
Well, I guess tell me a little bit about the Bay and its origin story. When did you when did you start that, and like what were some of the the initial ideas behind you kind of starting it?
Yeah, I mean, really, I Googled how to start a nonprofit and wanted to create a place where kids could go, And so when I was starting in Lincoln, there was a skate park that had already existed and they had closed down, and I got all of their like infrastructure. I got all these like ramps and glass display cases and printers and speakers and just like pads to wrap poles with, all the stuff that it costs a lot to do. This place closed down, and they were like, if you can figure out something to do with them, you can have them. And so I very quickly just kind of slapped a like ragtag board of directors together of like my friends' dads, and asked them all to help. And it was like a couple construction company guys, a roofing company dude, and they all bailed me out a million times, along the way. And I just sort of started this nonprofit skate park, and nobody got paid for the first few years, but we were essentially, for the first 2 years, we were a skate park in the mall, and we were called Bay 198. And we were Bay 198 because like they asked me what I wanted to call it, and I didn't have a good name for it. And the location in the mall, we were Bay 198. Like Sears was Bay 199 and Radio Shack was like Bay 200. And so the back sticker on our door said Bay 198. And they were like, what are you going to call it? And I was like, Bay 198. And like, that's just where the name came from. And then we got out of there and got into this bigger space that we're in now. But, really at first it was like, I just was solving the problem of like kids needed a place to go. And it was a very scrappy nonprofit for the first 7 or 8 years, and then we kind of like have had our story forward or whatever. But yeah, we were just very scrappy at the start.
That's awesome, man. And so recently you've kind of not spun that off, but you've kind of created a new initiative. Is it Bay High School?
Yeah, Bay High. So basically, the way it works is the Bay is this place in Lincoln. Our nonprofit now is called Rabble Mill. So Rabble Mill is like our organizational name, and
Hmm.
we hope to open lots of bays. And so, my friend and I, my best friend and I from high school, we merged our nonprofits in 2018. That's when we stopped being so chaotic. Was when I partnered with my best friend, and we kind of had this like 1+1, and we were able to work together as co-executive directors now and co-founders. And so we created Rabble Mill, the organization, and the Bay is one of our programs. So in Lincoln, we have this really dynamic youth space called the Bay, and it's huge skate park, multiple venues. There's a coffee shop where kids are going to get barista skills and be able to learn how to be, baristas. We're building an esports arena. There's like a content creation space. It's like a kid's freaking playground. It's the coolest place to go in the world if you're a kid. And so we built that space, and there's no kids in it until 3 p.m., which like as a youth worker drove me nuts. Like you're waiting for kids to be there, and kids used to skip school to show up at our skate park. And it got me thinking like, well, what if kids could just go to school here instead of skipping school to come here? Like, what if they went to school here and this was a part of their experience? And so Lincoln doesn't have charter schools. We don't have charter schools in Nebraska. So we have what they call as focus programs. So it's like, you get a different focus. So there's one at our zoo, and so it's like science focused, and there's one called arts and humanities. And so we're like BMIT, business marketing info and tech focused. Like that's our curriculum area that we're under, but we're basically like marketing focused. And so we're teaching kids all of these really cool skills through Adobe and content creation and video editing and photography and all those kinds of classes. And we're using our space as the classroom to learn those skills. And so it's like, you want to learn how to take photos or videos, do it for skateboarding. You know what I mean? It's way harder to do for that than almost anything else. And you'll learn a ton of skills along the way. You want to be future ready, like come through our barista program where you get your food handler's permit, and now you learn how to make latte art and take social media for like a coffee shop. And so we're trying to teach kids a lot of the really applicable marketing skills, podcasting, like what you're doing, creating their own brand, things like that. That's the stuff we're going to focus on at our focus program. And so we launch next fall with 50 juniors and 50 seniors. And we're really focusing on that workforce development component. It's that youth development piece of like success after high school. What does that look like? How can we help create it? How can we sustain it? How can we really make a difference with the kids in our community? And so we're really focusing on like juniors and seniors and that like future ready space. And so we're excited. There's a lot of youth development ahead, and there's a lot of youth work ahead, but we're excited about it.
That's really cool. Yeah, I feel like we've seen a big movement in the K-12 space over the last few years with, STEM and STEAM programs. But this program that you're launching is really unique. I don't think I've seen many of them in the K-12 space, if any. But it sort of reminds me, uh, earlier in the fall, we had Chris Taylor on our podcast. He's in a similar role as yours at Ball State University, and he runs a student-led media production program. And I remember him telling us, in the early days when they were trying to convince faculty and staff at the university to get funding and get different, resources put towards this program. He had to find some champions within the university who believed in the mission and believed what he was doing, in order to get that support. Were there people within, the public school system there in Lincoln who come to mind with, just in terms of giving you that support early on that have kind of led to where you are now?
Oh, heroes, the rock stars, the people. It takes someone like me to dream up a big idea and a crazy thing and give your space to someone, but it takes actual intelligent, passionate people about innovation. And so, our actual superintendent here in Lincoln, Steve Joel, is an awesome dude, and he is the guy who was really innovative, really pushed for focus programs. He put it in our strategic initiative for our community that, hey, we need to focus on these things. Kids are asking for these things, so let's listen to them. And so it took Steve Joel's leadership, and that takes a dynamic leader, someone who's, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, and you've got to be able to look people in the face and say, we're going to do it different. And Steve did that. And so our superintendent was like the first champion. And then James Blake is our principal. And so he is the director of strategic initiatives and a focus program principal of 3 different schools. So he's like Bill Nye the Science Guy during the day working at the zoo. And then he's oversees arts and humanities working with our kids that are in our creative art space, and these are your future activists and artists, awesome kids. And then he oversees Bay High, who's going to be more of your content creation, those sorts of focus kids. And so he's got like skateboarding, science focused, humanities focused, arts focused. It's crazy. He's all over the board, but he has had so many moments where the plan has changed along the way. At first it looked very different than it does right now, and he has had to pivot and really champion this and really fight for this. And honestly, he's had to get advocates inside of the district to believe in this as well. But he's just really put himself out there and pushed hard for this. And so it's been really cool to see, the public school system innovate and pivot and try something new when it so often gets told that it doesn't and it can't and it won't. And so it gets attacked a lot. And I can say I've firsthand have seen how it is doing something different and innovative and creative and new. And if we can do it at a public high school in Lincoln, Nebraska, this is a model for anybody anywhere. And I think that there's some really cool things that can happen very easy at any school, and whatever kind of school you are, to create a small experience like this, because a lot of kids are excited for it. The difference we have, we were joking today, we're like redoing our website. The difference we have about our educational system is kids are choosing us. Like, kids want to come to our school. Kids don't want to go to school, but kids want to come to our school because they know it's going to be different and in an environment that they're passionate about. And if you think about a lot of disengaged youth, especially coming out of COVID, especially coming, through the way it's been for young people for the last few years, it's like they're looking for something different and authentic to sink their teeth into. And I don't think it's as hard to create as everybody thinks it is. And we hope to be able to prove that model in Lincoln, that this isn't that difficult and you can do it too. You just have to impose a few of these elements and values in what you're doing, and you can make a huge difference for a lot of kids who typically don't necessarily connect after high school or even connect in high school for a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think too, like, even, I'm trying to reflect on, my experience growing up and obviously not having, you know, the internet and social media. When I was in high school, I have to imagine, obviously your target student is probably, a little more tech savvy and a little more comfortable with social media. So, the idea of them, finding you in today's day and age is just a lot different than, when we were growing up. And I didn't even cross my mind to look for another, education option when I was, in high school. So, I'm just the ability for them to find you is, so much easier now. But, um, it makes me think, like, a lot of the conversations we have with our school district partners, or, the private schools or the public charter schools we work with, they can be sometimes, fearful to get students involved in the content creation side of things, like giving them, access to, their accounts and posting, what the experience is really like within their schools. I guess, hearing that, like, how would you advocate for more, um, schools and school districts to actually get students more involved in some of the content creation that goes on, within their own channels?
Totally. Well, I think there's two things that I think are solved. One is we use Flipgrid a lot. Flipgrid is a platform where it's video sharing and it's a controlled space, but you can upload video and content to it. And so it works like social media. And so we use that a lot as like mock social because it has the same exact feel, but it's controlled and contained. And then two, we do it through partners. We partnered with business to make this school happen. Most businesses need help in social media more than anywhere else. They know they do because it's the newest, most evolving thing. And so young people who are really good at making TikToks, who are really good at shooting social media content, who are really good at making videos, who are really good at just knowing their way around a camera, that's like every Gen Z kid, period. Like they just know how to do it regardless. And so if you can teach them how to navigate the language of business, they can become a resource right away. And so for us, it's like internships, you know, it's creating accounts or things that are getting them involved with experiencing social media in the way that business does it. Like, I don't think school understands like posting a photo on your school's Instagram account is not helpful, is not cool. Nobody can, like, that's not it for a kid. That doesn't unlock any doors into the future. And it causes this like stress and is very problematic for schools. So stop trying. That's not even the right, you're like going to the wrong answer. The right answer is go connect with your local business, go connect with people who want social media content, who would use it and need help, have the kids create it, give it to them, let them go then use it. Now these kids are shooting ads for your local car wash or your local grocery store, your small mom and pop insurance agency. Where kids need time isn't putting it on the internet. They're really good at that, adults. They're better than you. What they need time at is developing the skills of doing it in the professional way, which is being behind the camera, developing the assets, delivering it in a finished product. You're going to have to chop this podcast up and go post it and get it out to everybody after this. And that takes a lot of effort and time. Imagine if you had 5 high school kids that you were like, hey, chop this up, give us our social media assets. We need 15-second cuts, 30-second cuts, make them vertical, make them horizontal, build them for TikTok. This is how we're going to release it. And that's part of their school day. Those kids are learning something now, actually, and they can give it to business. And that's helpful. This like posting and access on our accounts, that's not even helpful for kids or the school either. And so I would look at it differently and find a few partners in town. Schools are always looking for a way to partner with business. This is the best way to do it, is like with these kids giving real assets to local business or working on projects with people like you, because now you've got kids in the studio. They're getting to see what a job is. I can't tell you how many times a kid's been with us or on a call, or I put them in a focus group somewhere and they're talking to someone and they can't even believe the jobs that exist in the world as like art director and content creator and events coordinator and manager. Our kids are like, these are jobs, like they don't even get that part. And so if we're going to really move the needle, get them in the industry. Don't worry about, did they post it on our Facebook? Like, that's not it. Like, they're better at posting than we are. They just don't know the language. Here's a good example. There's 2 kids that work for us at Bay that have 2 million followers on TikTok. They get stuff sent to them all the time. They're doing unboxings for everybody, but the language, like return on investments, pitch deck, some of the language, they didn't know any of that. They had no idea what that was. They were just really good at putting stuff on the internet. When they learned the business of it, they became a business, and now they're getting paid to do stuff on the internet. But they had to learn the language and the art of delivering to corporate companies, and that's what you can teach kids all the time, because they're in every town, they're in every community, and every community sucks at it. Every local little business is pretty terrible at social media. Give it to the kids and watch it excel. And so that's what we're doing in our local community. We've got our biggest businesses in town so excited to partner with our kids on a real level, because they're going to learn the skills and they're going to get an awesome product along the way.
That's really cool. Yeah, and I think there's some good synergy too between what you're doing and I think one thing you're starting to see in the higher education space is a lot of marketing communications majors are starting to have programs like this, and so I think this program that you're running can be a real avenue for some of your students to potentially get scholarship dollars. Quite honestly, so I mean it's
Totally.
it's it's very rare that freshmen in college like come in with a reel this impressive, you said 2 million TikTok followers. Like the average college freshman who's getting into marketing or communications or broadcast just doesn't often have that type of real world experience. So I think you're
Totally.
really providing a leg up with this too. So
And our hope is, a lot of our kids aren't necessarily on a university track right now. And so our hope is this might be a good way to kickstart them into hopping into that. Or and if this doesn't work as a further education opportunity, if they're partnering with business and they're working with business, this might lead to a real job or an entrepreneurship
Right.
opportunity. So we're
Right.
excited about bridging that gap between the two.
That's awesome. Well, I have to ask you. So before we hopped on, I watched the promo video for the Bay High with Tony Hawk. So how did you get Tony involved? And I guess what's your take on celebrities? I guess becoming modern day role models, and I guess taking ownership of launching schools and things like that we've seen with LeBron James and maybe some other professional athletes who have had similar projects.
Totally. I think celebrities and athletes and people like Tony, they're always going to be the influencers of our time because we have so much more access to famous people and influencers now than we ever have before. And so I always applaud the ones who are using that platform as in a meaningful, impactful way. They're taking, there's a lot of ways you could leverage a following and to do it to try to make a difference in education, to run into a place right now that's underfunded and under resourced, and to offer optimism and innovation and new ideas and new energy and new partnerships into school is really valuable right now. And so I think it's a good thing when you can get people who can come in and offer resources and are trying to make it better, and each state, each community, each district has a different rule and way to do it. So it's always up for debate what the best way to do it is. But I think that generally speaking, it's awesome to see celebrities using that for good. And so I'm a fan of it. And as far as the Tony Hawk thing goes, that, the Skate Park Foundation is what they're called, and they are super accessible. And, I had a friend who was a connect and hit him up, and we've worked with the Tony Hawk Foundation for multiple programs, on trying to get a skate park started in my small town. They're working on other projects across Nebraska. We've talked, a lot about ways. Yeah, we were just in conversation with them about ways that we could continue to partner. And when Bay High came along, getting him to shoot a quick video on his phone and send it to our team to put into a video like that, they were really excited about. And they're an awesome advocate for all things good in skateboarding. And so it's been really cool to see them just with their support. And so we hope to keep partnering with them, but they're doing really cool stuff and are responsible for so much of the positivity in skateboarding, comes out of the Skate Park Foundation, which is awesome. And so it's cool to see how much of an impact Tony Hawk's had across all of it. Like, he's transcendent from little kids to you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And if you follow him on social, you can always appreciate how funny it is with like the people who don't remember
Yeah. I was
or
going to
don't
say,
recognize Tony Hawk or say you look like, it's always, oh, I die. They're so funny. They're so good. Some of them are so funny. But yeah, it's
yeah,
one of my favorite parts of the internet is his updates on those.
that's awesome, man. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen a lot of those tweets, people mistaking him for, you kind of look
Mhm.
like Tony Hawk. And yeah, he has a lot of fun with that. It's been cool.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess for schools or districts that are considering, something similar to Bay High, what advice would you give to them in terms of just how to start something like this? Because I mean, you said it earlier, but it can be kind of seen as a foreign concept to a public school district, to launch something like this. I mean, really, you're just seeing the innovation in the STEM area that's kind of been there in business for a long time, but it's just kind of getting around to K-12 education. So something like the Bay, what advice would you give to a school or school district that is maybe interested in doing something like this? How can they start?
I would say, if I was if a superintendent today and I had that responsibility, or a principal today and I had that responsibility, most youth are looking for that place to go where they can identify with the things, then the values and the experiences that make them who they are. And I think that instead of like really drastically changing a lot, what we need to just do is create more space. And I think a lot of schools don't do a good job of creating space for people who think differently and want to learn differently. And so we're not changing a ton, but if you're going to school in the middle of like a coffee shop at different tables and there's screens everywhere and it's easier for the teacher to hop on those screens and show all the kids and it's just a more dynamic space, but the content's very similar. When the kids are, I see it every day, kids walking around public high schools in photo class trying to take pictures outside of the same weird, it's not that dynamic. But if you turn around and look at a space like ours, it's dynamic and the kids have designed it and it's always changing, but there's things that they can do there that they love, like music and recording and podcasting and gaming and skateboarding, and it's open late. And so I think if I was a school, I would look to create these spaces, and I'd put them as close to your school as you possibly can, or attach them to your school. Like that, most nonprofits like ours, the closer we are to a school, the more successful it is, because transportation isn't an issue. And so if you've got dollars to put into something right now, create dynamic youth spaces where innovative experiences can actually happen, because your fluorescent lights with your drop ceilings and your drywall walls and your stale carpet with the tables they've sat in all day, that's not the answer. So like you can't do it where they've been all day, but if they walked around the corner and there was a dynamic space that just looked different, that would move the needle. And skateboarding is insurable. Skateboarding isn't this scary monster in the room. It is in the Olympics. So like for all the scarcity mindset folks, like drop the like, oh, it's the boogeyman thing. Like it happens everywhere. The YMCA does it. Like it's not that scary of a thing. And it's not like there's a lot of insurance companies who get behind it. And so I think you need to just like, you can play football, you can skateboard, for crying out loud. Like it's not that different. And so I would just say like, leverage your ability to create spaces better. Like don't hire the same architect firm who builds a school every time. Hire an architect firm who builds creative dynamic spaces. And here's where school's missing it truly. They're not building a transition to what the workforce feels like. Like this, your school day is so different from what an experience in an office or the workforce is like. When kids get there, they're so unprepared. But if you build spaces that mimic the workforce, when they get to the workforce, they won't be so unprepared for it, because they've had a lot of experiences 9 to 5 in a workspace, learning things and doing things. And so I really think if I was an administrator today, if you get a new building opportunity, you get federal dollars coming down to impact, where you're going to invest it in kids who have been drastically impacted by COVID and things like that, like invest it in new spaces where new learning and future learning can happen. And you don't have to really overthink it. Kids need a place to be rough and kids and creative and dynamic. Elementary school kids need to fall down and play and get back up. Middle school kids need a place to hang out and be too cool, but it's got to like facilitate their needs. And high school kids need a place to project those skills that are going to carry them into the next world. It's not that difficult, but like you really got to think about space differently. And if I was an administrator, that's where I would start. Not programmatically yet, like create better spaces for young people. And I think you're going to see you'll impact a different kind of kid every single year, over and over and over, because that's the cool part about schools is like there's a new group of students every single year coming through. And it's like, man, create better spaces, you'll create better experiences. I promise you. That's why people love us. It's the coolest place on earth, because you walk in and you're like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And it's like, it's an old warehouse that we gutted. We just made it a misfit museum, like it's awesome. And it's a kid can feel like a kid there, but they can also learn there as well.
Yep. Yeah. The space and the environment. I think if they can get that down, like that's the biggest hurdle. And the reality is with, today's, ever changing, media climate and all the new technology. I mean, that stuff changes so dynamically. It's hard to start with the programmatic stuff right away. Like
Yeah,
you said, if you can get the space down, the rest will kind of take care of itself, and you can, you know, kind of be dynamic with the types of programs you offer, because they are going to change every, few years, just with the overall advances in
totally.
technology and everything. So yeah,
Yep. Yeah, we're
yeah,
running all our conduit and everything on the outside of the walls, because we know that like technology is going
yeah.
to change. That's going to change, but creating a place where a kid can come alive, like that doesn't, that takes some thought and some effort. But I think that every school district has an opportunity, because schools have so much space. You know what I mean? Like they
Yep.
just do. So
Yep.
there's always an opportunity there.
Well, we know you're a big thinker. So what's next for Bay High? I know you said you want to expand this thing over time. Like where do you see this in 5, 10,
Yeah.
20 years?
Yeah, so we're looking at Bay Omaha. So we want to launch a second site, our second location. And then I grew up in me and our co-founder of Rabble Mill. We both grew up in the same small town, which is like the other half of the state. Nebraska's got like there's like the 308 area code and the 402 area code, and 402 is where there's a lot more people, and 308 is the western part of the state. And we keep saying that there's got to be a bay in the 308 someday, somewhere, and so we have visions for that. And so I used to have a very global very big. I'm going to work with tens of millions of youth, and I did on a large scale work with lots and lots of youth and traveled the world and spoke and did all these things. But since the pandemic hit and my focus has really turned local, I'm not going back. I guess my focus is really going to be like this state, Nebraska youth, kids here, create something that works here. And if the opportunity really presents itself to build outside of Nebraska, I probably won't be scared of it. But for right now, like we would love to see three bays here, one in Omaha, one in Lincoln, and one in Greater Nebraska, and then just continue to make an impact on my state and the kids here through all the different programs that we're launching in our spaces.
That's awesome, man. Well, so we end each podcast with the same question. We're going to give you the magic wand, and with that magic wand, you can change one thing about K-12 education. So if we gave you that wand, how would you wield its magical powers?
I would say that every building has to be different from the next, and it's got to be created with this like new and innovative things in mind, but no more building them the way we build them, because I think that is the issue. So if I could change anything about the education system, it would be the way we built those spaces, because I think all the learning is there. The thing that doesn't make sense, teachers are the most dedicated, unthanked people on the planet. They're the greatest humans of all time. They're saints. And they're in these spaces where they're trying to make something happen in a 4x4 box that was not crafted for magic to happen, yet they work miracles every freaking day. And so if we could give teachers what they deserve, it's like you got to go build a castle and put kings and queens in them and like watch the credible things that they do. We just got to build better spaces because teachers know what to do. They just need the resources to do it. I fully believe that. I fully believe
Amen.
that. So that's the wand I would wave, is I'd give teachers a better space to do what they're already great at.
I love that. Totally agree. Well, awesome, Mike. We appreciate you doing this, man. What's the best way for someone to learn more about Bay High and everything you have going on?
Yeah, Rabble Mill, RABBLEMILL. So that's rabblemill.org or thebay.org or bayhigh.org. Or just a good Google search of all those things. You'll find it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, man, and really appreciate everything you're doing. And the name of this podcast is Productive Disruption, and people like you are the reason why we started. So really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, cool. Of course. I appreciate it, man.